The Mystic Invasion. Low Fantasy. When Our World Was Invaded by the Impossible. A Ludicrous Tale by Calvin Williams. Audiobook also by Calvin Williams. Chapter 1. The Fabric of the Universe Experiences Lag. The Mystic Invasion was one of the greatest cataclysms mankind has ever seen. Countless lives were lost during the invasion, and many more people were seriously injured in ways that could have affected them for the rest of their lives. Homes were destroyed, families were torn apart, and thousands of innocents were forced to fight for their survival hopelessly. Almost the entire population of the world was forced to kneel before an overwhelming tyrannical power, the likes of which had never been seen before outside of fairy tales. But despite that, and don't tell anyone I told you this, part of me is kinda glad it happened. Now, don't get me wrong. For the most part, I hated the invasion just as much as everyone else did. How could I not hate it? I lost a lot the day that mysterious army of monsters attacked, as did everyone else. But despite that, part of me is still glad. Not glad that the world was nearly conquered, of course, but glad that I got my chance to have that adventure that so many of us spend sleepless nights thinking about. I got the chance to use my creativity, street smarts, and vast array of seemingly useless knowledge to help save the world. A word of advice: the next time someone tells you that there's no point in researching the weaknesses of a fictional monster, don't listen to them. It could save your life. However, while incredibly unlikely, it is still possible that something like this could happen again sometime in the future. But if there is ever another event like this, then perhaps a new hero could play the same role I did. In fact, it could even be you. Hopefully history won't repeat itself, but in case it does, I feel obligated to tell you my story, and how I did what I did, so that when the time comes, you'll be ready. My name is Carl Nelton. At the start of the story, I was a 17-year-old junior at Franksville High. Franksville being a small town in upstate New York. The invasion began on a Friday, which was a real shame because if it started on Monday, then I could have gone into this catastrophe well rested from the weekend. Normally, I'd begin this story a little while before the invasion in order to properly explain what events led up to it, but in truth, the events leading up to the invasion were completely normal. There were no warning signs, no dots to connect, and no possible way for us to know what was coming until just a few hours before, when it was already too late to stop it. 2 hours before the invasion began, I was sitting in the school cafeteria enjoying a slice of pizza, which surprisingly wasn't that bad despite being made in a school cafeteria. Next to me was my cousin and best friend, Jasper, and we were having a not-so-friendly debate about last night's game. "Dude," Jasper exclaimed, "werewolves do not have that much HP, and you know it." "We've been over this," I replied. "As the Dungeon Master, I have the right to alter the stats of any monster in order to make the game better for everyone. I increased the werewolf's health to make it more of a challenge." "I one-shot that thing fair and square, dude," Jasper rebutted. "That thing would have had to have double health to survive a hit like that." "The werewolf was the only boss I prepared," I told him. "If I had just let it die, then you would have been able to waltz through the rest of this session without a hitch. Don't you want a challenge?" "You should have found a better boss then. We're too high level to fight a werewolf on its own. You should have given us something with a higher challenge rating." "None of the monsters at your level that fit with the campaign setting looked like they'd make a good boss. I wanted to give you a real fight against something cool." After I told him this, Jasper pulled out his phone so he could look up some examples of good boss monsters in order to show me how incredibly wrong I was. But for some reason, he didn't have any cell service. Not just bad service, he had no signal at all. "That's weird," he said. "This was working fine just a minute ago." "Is something interfering with the signal?" I asked as I took a glance around the cafeteria. The guy sitting at the table next to us had been watching videos on his phone earlier, loudly, I might add, but now his phone was silent and he seemed to be annoyingly tapping at it to get it to start playing again. Then across the cafeteria, I also noticed there were a few other tables with people who looked annoyed at their phones. One girl on her laptop seemed pretty annoyed too, as if it had also lost internet connection. After noticing all this, I took a look at my own phone, and sure enough, 0 bars of service. There also didn't seem to be any Wi-Fi networks available. It appears there's some sort of cafeteria-wide communications disruption, I joked. We may be under attack soon, and this is the enemy's way of stopping us from calling for help. Jasper chuckled. Yeah, oh well. I'll just look up bosses after school and send you some angry DMs. Your feedback is appreciated, I replied. But I'd prefer it if you weren't angry. Alright, fine, we'll call it a truce then. Jasper and I clinked together our chocolate milks and cheers and continued eating. The signal disruption was weird, but it was hardly a sign of the apocalypse. It wasn't until 6th period English, the last class of the day, that things got weird. Miss Carahan was giving us instructions for our next essay about the Great Depression. I swear, sometimes English class feels like history class. I sat behind Ava, my other cousin, and Jasper's twin sister. She and Miss Carahan were having a debate about her grading being unbalanced. Why is 40% of our grade dedicated to grammatical errors? Ava asked/shouted. Don't you care about the actual subject more than if someone misused a semicolon? If you haven't picked up on it by now, my cousins love to argue. And if you think it's bad now, wait until you see them arguing with each other. It's a train wreck. Bring popcorn. I'd watch your tongue, Ava, Miss Carahan advised sternly. Being coherent is far more important than any of our various topics, as it will always be crucial regardless of what you're writing. Hold on, what's wrong with my voice? Miss Carahan lost focus on what she was saying as her voice suddenly became slightly muffled. What the? Oh, that is so weird, Ava exclaimed, noticing that apparently all of the sound in the room was being repressed somehow. As everyone in the room took notice of the sound, we also noticed a few other things that had suddenly started to seem off. Most notably, the room now looked fuzzy. Seriously, it was like the room was being displayed on a computer screen that was set at a resolution of only 480p. It was weird. Okay, what's going on here? Asked the guy sitting next to me. Is something in the air? Did something leak? I wondered. Okay, everyone calm down, the teacher exclaimed, although I could tell she was just as confused as the rest of us. One of the girls sitting near the door checked outside to see if this weird atmospheric disturbance was contained to this room. To our surprise, she found that not only was the atmosphere in the hallway also fuzzy, but people were coming out of other classrooms saying that their rooms were doing the same thing. Eventually, Miss Carahan piped up. All right, everyone, grab your things. We're heading outside in case there's a leak of some kind. Everyone was glad for an excuse to get out of class, so we all grabbed our stuff and hauled ourselves out into the gray April weather. However, much to our surprise... Things are still fuzzy out here, Ava said with confusion. How are things still fuzzy out here? Huh, I don't know. If the gas is coming out from inside the school, it should be dispersing, I said with an equal amount of confusion. What the heck could be causing this? Many of the other kids wondered the same, with a few of them looking up at the clouds. Ava was thinking the same thing. Is something up with the weather? Ava asked. Some sort of atmospheric storm? Now, that was a possibility, but it still didn't make any sense. I had never seen or heard of the weather doing anything like this before. Besides, if a storm did do this, I doubt it would have much effect on the rooms inside a large air-conditioned building, yet the atmosphere in there was just as distorted as it was out here. Plus, the clouds above us looked completely normal, and it really didn't feel like a weather issue. Strangely enough, it felt more like something was off with the fabric of reality itself. Everything still felt the same, but my other senses were ever so slightly dulled. It felt almost as if the universe was having trouble processing itself, causing reality to come out all fuzzy and muffled as a result. I don't think it's the weather, I told Ava. The distortion barely changed when we came outside. Good point, Ava replied. Although, it did feel like it intensified a little bit. Not by a lot, but I definitely felt it. As a matter of fact, Ava perked up as she realized something. I think it was increasing slightly while we were going through the hallway, too. Almost as if we were heading closer to whatever was causing this. I finished. That didn't make sense. But neither did anything else that was happening. I looked out in the direction we came out in, towards the school football field. You think there's something over there that's causing this? I mean, maybe, Ava said. We don't have much to go off of here. Maybe if someone went closer, they could. I stopped mid sentence, as suddenly my voice was no longer muffled. Everything came back into focus and stopped looking so fuzzy. Just as suddenly as the distortion had arrived, it dissipated. A few people cheered, and Miss Carhan started herding everyone back inside. Of course, the second we're no longer at risk of dying in some weird chemical explosion, and we have to immediately get back to work, Ava remarked as we began to shuffle towards the door. I took another look out towards the football field and the woods behind them. Something out there had caused whatever that was. Sure, it was probably nothing, but still. That sort of thing wasn't natural. I wonder what on earth could have happened out there to cause something like this, I murmured. You wouldn't happen to know if there were any secret government labs out in that direction, would you? Ava stopped at the door and looked back at me. Oh, I bet you'd love that, she laughed. But last I checked, the local hospital is that way. So, unless we're upwind of some sort of gaseous drug leak that caused some kind of shared hallucination, I'm guessing that's not the source. Yeah, that sounds unlikely, I replied. Maybe it came from way past the hospital? We don't know how wide the radius was on that distortion. I'm gonna stop you right there, Ava said as she pulled out her phone. You are looking way too deep into this. I'm sure that soon the local news will give us a reasonable explanation for all this, alongside however large the radius was and any other weirdly specific questions you have about this. All we have to do is. Ava paused, staring at her phone blankly. The connection is down, I reminded her. So it is, she replied. Do you think the service outage could have something to do with whatever that was? It's feasible. Do you think we should... You too, shouted Mrs. Carhan, cutting me off. We're waiting on you. Come on. Ava and I came back inside and shuffled back into our seats. After we'd returned, I was hoping to continue speculating on what happened, but Ava cut me off the second I opened my mouth. Look, Carl, I know this is the most excitement we've gotten around here since that car crash last year, but you've got to relax, she told me. Everything's fine. It was nothing. It's over now. I have to focus. I'm not doing well in this class, especially since the teacher messed up the rubric again. You can talk about this whole thing as much as you want with my brother later, alright? I didn't appreciate her shutting me down like that, but I suppose it wasn't unreasonable. With Ava's tendency to argue with the teachers all the time, they didn't exactly grant her many favors when it came to grading, so she really did need to focus. But there was one thing I needed to bring up. I wouldn't exactly call that car crash last year exciting, I told Ava. That girl ended up in a coma. Considering the kind of stuff you're into, I figured tragedy and excitement go hand in hand, Ava rebutted. Well, that's just uncalled for, I replied, before looking back at the work instructions in front of me. That whole distortion debacle still had my attention, but at the moment, I also needed to focus on the work in front of me. With any luck, I'd still have internet back home, and I'd be able to check to see if there were any reports on what happened. If the internet and cell service were out at home too, then I'd have all weekend to figure out what was up. But unfortunately, things wouldn't work out that well. Because as it would turn out, I only had 5 minutes until my whole world was turned on its head. Chapter 2. A Dark Lord's army invades my high school. Shortly after returning indoors, I began to hear a rumbling sound. It was distant, but growing louder, as if there was a large stampede approaching from afar. Of course, that would be ridiculous. Still, though... Does anyone hear that rumbling? I asked. Hear what now? Asked Ava, who was absorbed in her work. I hear it, nodded Miss Carhan. That's odd. I'm gonna go check it out, I said, getting up from my seat. Now wait just a minute, spat Miss Carhan, getting up from her own seat as she did so. You can't just walk out in the middle of class the second there's a slight distraction. There's work to be done. Alright, fine, I rescinded. But can I at least go to the bathroom? Ava shot me a look, like, dude, seriously? Needless to say, she saw right through me. The teacher sighed. Fine, just be quick. Now that I had permission, I started speed walking down the hallway in the direction of the rumbling sound, which just so happened to be coming from the direction of the football field, the same direction that the disruption came from earlier. Yeah, I thought, something's up. It didn't take me long to get to the back door of the school. Not wanting to get locked out, I held the door open and stood in the doorway, trying to see if I could spot the source of the rumbling, which seemed to be getting much closer with every passing moment. Among the rumbling sounds was another noise that sounded like some sort of howl. Yeah, I thought, something is definitely up. After about 15 seconds of looking at the door, I saw the first dark figure come into view. I didn't notice it at first, since it was all the way across the football field, but after a couple of seconds I spotted the figure moving around, although I couldn't quite tell what it was doing. Then another figure came out of the woods. Then another. Slowly but surely, the rumbling sounds came to a halt as hundreds upon hundreds of figures, dressed in black robes, emerged from the forest and stopped at the edge of the football field. No, wait, I realized. It's not robes they're wearing. It's armor. Was this the source of the rumbling? Was it these people, whoever they were, running through the woods? Just how many of them were there? If they made that much noise, then it would have to be thousands. After the shock wore off, I swept my head around to get a proper look at their numbers. They weren't just lining up across from the school, they seemed to be popping up all over the forest line. As much of the neighborhood that I could see had these soldiers lining up at the edge of the tree line. Cars were even stopping in the middle of the roads as people in the black armor lined up in the streets. I was wrong when I estimated thousands. This would have to be more like tens of thousands. Where could an army this big have possibly come from? Those woods they came out of weren't big. They were surrounded by civilization on all sides. How could they have gotten out into Franksville without anyone noticing? Certainly, someone would have sent a warning to the people here if... Oh. Right. Both the internet and the cell service are down. Wow, I guess the mystery of who did that is solved then. Well played, mysterious army. Then I noticed something even stranger somehow. Within the army's ranks, there appeared to be some that looked shorter than normal soldiers and seemed to be on all fours. Were those dogs? No, they were too big to be dogs. Bears? No, they weren't quite that big. They looked more like wolves on steroids. Since the army didn't seem to be doing anything threatening at the moment, and I wanted a better look, I decided to pull out my phone and use the zoom in on my camera to get a better look. It wasn't much, but with the better image, I was able to better see the beasts for what they were. The problem was, I had no idea what they were. They seemed to be some kind of oversized barbaric hounds. Definitely not like anything I'd ever seen. These massive beasts had red streaks across their face and deathly looks in their eyes that would have made any normal wolf beg and whimper. I managed to snap a few pictures of these hellhounds, but while I did so, I noticed another dark shape circling above. I pointed my phone camera towards it and found myself looking at an even stranger creature. The hellhounds, you could probably convince me, were just a species of wolf I'd never seen before, because no one who enters their territory makes it out alive. But these creatures in the sky definitely weren't natural. They looked like some kind of bat, except protruding from their backsides were tails that were lined with razor-sharp spikes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but normal bats don't have tails at all, right? Let alone ones covered in knives. Additionally, these bats seem to be leaving a trail of some kind of thick green gas, most likely by exhaling it. Fun fact, the first thing my chemistry teacher taught our class was that any gas that has color is almost certainly deadly. Just when it seemed as though things couldn't get any weirder, I learned that alongside having small-time monsters such as mutated hounds and bats, this army also had larger monsters at their disposal. I discovered this when what appeared to be a massive, honest-to-God, Tyrannosaurus Rex crashed through the forest and let out a massive roar as one of the trees it knocked down crushed a few of the unlucky soldiers standing below. The soldiers standing next to the ones who were crushed appeared to have no reaction, as if they couldn't care less that a tree just fell on their fellow soldiers, some of whom could likely use some help getting out from under the limbs. No reaction at all? I thought. Are these guys robots or something? Wouldn't they care if they were the ones being crushed? Who are these people? At this point, the only reason I hadn't turned around and run away screaming was because the army seemed to be holding off on doing anything, and I was worried that if I took my eye off them for even a moment, then they'd suddenly attack without warning, and I'd be ran through by a dozen different swords and spears all at once. But this urge to stay put and watch would soon dissipate as a loud booming voice suddenly rang out among the army, with no visible source. The voice sounded like it came from a girl around my age, possibly even someone who could have attended this school. But within this girl's voice was a sort of unhinged maniacal spirit that you would expect out of a cartoon villain cranked up to 11. Her voice seemed to address this massive army. Go forth, my army. Wipe out this pathetic little neighborhood. Kill or torture anyone who resists. And a few people who don't resist, just for good measure. As for the rest, capture them and force them to kneel before our might. Attack! After that, I ran like hell. I estimated that the distance between me and my classroom was about half the distance of the width of the football field. But although the shorter distance gave me an advantage, I wasn't exactly all that in shape, and I'd imagine that most of the soldiers outside were probably twice as fast as I was. Meaning I had just enough time to get to the classroom and warn everybody before the soldiers reached the school doors. Guys, I yelled, barging in through the door. We gotta go, now! What? Asked Miss Carnahan, clearly confused. I guess the crazy lady's declaration of war must have been too faint to make out from inside. There's no time to explain, I gasped in exasperation, looking back at the doors outside. Thankfully, the doors to the school require a key card from a faculty member in order to open. However, I knew that wouldn't keep this crazy army out for long. Already, I could see something slamming against the doors trying to force them open, although I couldn't tell if it was a traditional battering ram or if they just had one of their massive hounds body slamming into the door repeatedly until it gave way. Regardless, I knew we didn't have much time. Oh, calm down, said Ava as she walked out to the hall to see what I was on about. What could possibly... Ava's eyes widened and she froze in surprise. Right as she made it into the hall, the doors outside slammed open, and several dozen soldiers and monsters began barreling through the halls, a few of them even firing arrows at us. I managed to shove Ava back inside the room and slam the door shut before we got hit. I pushed all my body weight against the door to make sure the soldiers wouldn't be able to get inside. Ava joined me a second later, but even with the two of us, I knew we had very little time until the soldiers forced their way inside. The two of us simply weren't strong enough to hold them. Barricade the door! I yelled in panic. Now! Hurry! What on earth is going on? Asked Miss Carnahan. I said now! I replied as the soldiers started yelling and attempted to kick the door open. The soldiers were strong, and even with Ava and I pushing against the door with all our might, it wasn't nearly enough. However, if we failed to hold the door, then we'd all be brutally murdered by a swarm of bad guys. So I gathered all the adrenaline and fear of death I could muster and channeled it into keeping the door shut. Although the rest of the class hadn't seen much, the loud, violent noises coming from the hall, combined with me and Ava fighting for our lives to keep the door closed, managed to spring a few of our classmates out of panicked confusion and into action, and they began grabbing tables and chairs. One of my stronger classmates pushed out a shelf in front of the door. A few of the other kids moved a bunch of desks and chairs around the shelf so it would stay put. I doubted that it would hold for long, but it was enough for Ava and I to be able to let go of the door and catch our breath. Okay, seriously, what is going on? Asked Miss Carnahan, looking confused and distraught. Yeah, who the hell were those guys? Ava asked me, finally recovering from her panicked silence. I don't know, I responded, equally panicked. They came out of the woods. It looked like there were thousands of them. Some of them weren't human. Uh-huh, not human, really? Asked another one of my classmates, whose name I don't know. Despite everything, this guy didn't seem to really believe anything serious was going on. Before I could properly explain, however, my point made itself, as a hellhound smashed through the window on the other side of the room and landed on some terrified kid's desk. Well, I thought, at least now people know what I was freaking out about. Too bad that we're all about to die for it. Luckily, though, Miss Carahan came to the rescue. When the hound crashed through the window, she was holding one of the school chairs at the ready, prepared to bash in the skull of whoever was about to bust through the door. When the hellhound burst through the window and onto a desk, it did so only to be slammed in the face by a hunk of metal and hard plastic. Miss Carahan gave a mix between a scream of terror and a war cry as she repeatedly beat the hound with her chair. "Is everyone all right?" asked Miss Carahan, standing over the dead hellhound, which went down surprisingly easy. A few of my classmates started to freak out, but after a few seconds, I managed to regain my composure and cut everyone off. "We need to get out of here now," I told everyone. "That barricade isn't going to hold." "Through the window. Now, everyone," barked Miss Carahan as she began to usher everyone through the broken window one at a time. Sure enough, the barricade began to rock, and the shelf in front of the door looked like it was about to fall over any second. Whatever battering ram they had been using on the back entrance to the school was now being repurposed for the door to our classroom. Ava and I brought up the rear as everyone crawled out through the window and Miss Carahan waited on the outside. However, just as the last student before us managed to crawl through, the shelf barricading the door fell over. Everyone on the other side of the door began running as fast as they could. Choosing to stay with the larger group, Miss Carahan loudly whispered one word to us: "Hide!" before then chasing after the other students. Looking around, I ducked behind a large nearby shelf, and Ava dove under Miss Carahan's desk. A second later, the door blasted open, and 3 soldiers burst into the room, seeing the open window and the students running for their lives. "They went out the window," one said, in a voice that was somehow both menacing and monotone. "Let them go," another said, in a voice that was somehow completely identical to the first one. "Our forces are spreading across the entire town. There will not be anywhere to run. We will be needed elsewhere inside this building." Then the 3 soldiers left to capture and kill more students. After they were out of earshot, Ava came out from her hiding place. "That was close," she shuddered. "Should we try to catch up with the others?" I looked out the window to see where our classmates were, and it didn't look good. Just as the soldiers predicted, the rest of the class had been ambushed by another group of dark soldiers, and were currently running for their lives. "That doesn't look like an option," I sighed. "It looks like we're on our own." "So what do we do?" Ava asked. "Hell if I know," I shuddered. "I can barely think straight. We should be dead." Ava and I sat there for a few moments breathing heavily, contemplating what to do next. Now, being the massive geek that I am, I'd be lying if I said I hadn't run through scenarios somewhat like this in my head on numerous occasions. Not scenarios exactly like this, mind you, but stuff like a zombie apocalypse or an alien invasion. Scenarios where the school or my home or wherever else came under attack by hostile invaders, and I somehow came to the rescue and took down all the bad guys. That was all in my head. Now that it was real, I mean, I had a bunch of ideas from all the time I spent daydreaming, but only a few of those might actually work in a real situation. Crap, I realized. I have no idea what to do. "We have to find my brother," Ava stated firmly, breaking the silence. "What?" I asked, my brain too busy panicking to fully process what she was saying. "Jasper, we can't just leave him here to get torn apart like everybody else. We have to find him." "Right," I said, snapping back to attention. "Of course." "Do you know what class he has this period?" Ava asked. "I remember it was a math class, but I can't remember the room." "No," I said, shaking my head. Then I smiled, as I realized that all the time I'd spent thinking about situations like this might actually pay off after all. Jasper and I had written up a plan of where we'd rendezvous in case a zombie apocalypse / alien invasion / whatever else broke out while we were at school. "I don't know where his class is," I told Ava, "but I know somewhere else he might go."